see need, please.
Great, and I have a question for you, actually. So when it comes to, we know that incentives are what drive outcomes, right? I think that quote, show me the incentives and I'll show you what the outcomes are. And for governments, it tends to be money and national security. Do you think that there's enough research that can support the economics of the transition in terms of why it actually is a matter of economic security to transition and a matter of national security because of you want energy independence in this kind of geoeconomically fragmented world. So there's potentially a silver lining with all of this confrontation and changing global posturing that energy independence, which is deeply coupled with renewables and clean energy, could be a potential solution that we could advocate for more?
It's a fantastic question, thank you. But I really think the answer is a strong, strong, strong yes, that the economics is, is very much there. I mean, green technology, green energy, green business, in my mind, the countries investing in that now are going to be long, long ahead of the game 10 years from now. That just seems obvious to me, but I think I think the data really backs it as well. And you know, even a lot of the big oil states now are investing huge amounts into climate technology. China is investing massively, massively in renewables and climate technology. Somehow in the West, we seem to be going the other way. And yeah, I really think it's, I don't know, it's ironic. And even, you know, with climate, I was mostly talking on the sort of mitigation side of things, reducing emissions, but there's also climate adaptation increasingly is significant, which is sort of, you know, building the infrastructure for the warming that we already know is going to happen. And there the funding, the economics is so clear. I mean, research on this has said that every dollar you put into climate adaptation, you save $10 down the road. And it's quite obvious how that looks, really, because I mean, you know, the flooding and everything I talked about, if you invest in the flood barriers now, that costs a lot less than if your whole city is destroyed by floods and you have to rebuild your entire city later. And so really there's a huge economic incentive, I think. And in terms of energy independence, it's a great point as well. I think we're seeing that energy independence is important, but you know, what better way to secure your energy independence than building wind and solar energy, which pretty much any country in the world can do. The point on security, sorry for the long answer, but I think that's so important as well. And Ruby across the way is actually a top expert in this. But there's increasingly much, much more evidence that many conflicts are connected to climate change. You look at the war, a lot of the Middle Eastern wars, Syria, a lot of the original trouble there began after cases of drought or food and water shortages and other climate change affected issues. So yeah, really, I think, and you know, the Ukraine war as well, very sort of clear connection how fossil fuels and the energy industry was connected there. So yeah, I think, you know, we're seeing a lot of countries now sort of ramping up security budgets. I would argue one of the best things you can do for security is actually also to ramp up your climate budget as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Who on the back? Yes.
Appreciate you. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Osei. I am a student at the University of Miami in Florida in the United States, studying psychology and political science on the pre-law track. Short, brief background before I get to the main question. As you know, obviously pre-law student. I'm partnered with Foundations for Leadership, which is a nonprofit that works a lot with civic participation, especially for middle and high school students that do Model UN. So that's like a big chunk of my work. And I'm here on recommendation from Dr. Lucia Rodriguez and Amy Ruggiero, who have done a lot of work with SDSN. So as it pertains to my particular question, a huge part of my research focus has to do with climate gentrification, and more specifically, how climate change as a whole, especially as it relates to the United States, as it relates to Miami, South Florida, has pushed out a lot of low-income, minority, Black, and brown communities. And I'd simply just like to hear your thoughts, and specifically, what policy proposals do you have in mind that keep the best interests of those citizens at heart while also ensuring sustainability? And I open this to the panel as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. I would like just to talk a bit about gentrification in Brazil and how it's also related to both gender and race, and how this is one of the critics that COP30 has been receiving, because as Belém is not one of the biggest Brazilian city, there is a lot of new infrastructure being built in the city, and people are complaining exactly about gentrification for COP30, and marginalized communities that live in the surrounding area of Belém are being removed, especially because of a road that's being built there. So I think this is an issue that we face in many places in the world, not only in the US, but in Brazil and maybe in the whole world. And we really need to talk about it, because most of these people can't even be in rooms like this. Most of these people don't even speak English. So why don't we have translations to other languages to make this more accessible for other people? Why everything needs to be in English? Why don't we have accessibility to all communities? And I would like to let this question down here, because it's a very important thing concerning vulnerable communities.
Yeah, no, it's a great another great question. Yeah, I think you couldn't be more right. If you look at any inequality that exists, climate change is looking to make it worse, very sadly. And yeah, Olivia said it very well. You know, once you're in that climate change trap, and you know your house has been flooded and destroyed, of course that makes it massively more difficult to get involved in the advocacy to try and address the issue. It's a huge problem. I guess the only sort of more hopeful thing I can say is that, you know, in addressing existing issues, I think there's great opportunity of addressing climate change in tandem. You've probably, I'm sure, heard of the concept of the Green New Deal, which is that, you know, in sort of modernizing and addressing poverty and all these other issues, climate change can be a great opportunity, you know, actually sort of tackling issues like gentrification by bringing in, you know, more renewables, more sustainability. Yeah, as much as the sort of bad effects of them sort of can amplify each other, the potential solutions can amplify each other as well. Hopefully they should do.
Well, I can quickly add on, I think one more point. I think in natural, that's also like broader problem in the climate. Like the global south, with more than half of global population, like who by high chance like didn't create the emissions like we experiencing today, and then are suffering the most. I mean, that's pretty much the biggest fight and argument at each COP about the funding, about like loss and damage, like different things. I don't really have a like professional answer regarding the policy making, but like one case study, Breakthrough Energy Fund, like they have research projects using the modeling to simulate how the grid would look like if you try to connect all the grids in the state. I mean, the reason there's a reason people are doing that, because we cannot really afford gambling on dollars, like building the infrastructure before we really know what's going to happening. I think the utilization of like solutions, technology solutions we have today to simulate the policy consequence might be something can be something we haven't done before, but it's possible today. And then I think at the non-technical perspective is we really need to like agree on what's the scope of the discussion here. it's like it's meaningless to compare which country contributed more emission, or which city contributed, unless they agree on what time frame we're talking about, or like the size, or like more conditions. And I think final thing, I kind of have this debate is that I think the system of fixing climate is based on punishing people, not encouraging people. So if we can like design the economy system to encourage people to do climate, it will be rewarded. I think would shape the narrative, but I don't know how. But it's like an outsider perspective. Yeah, thank you.
I love it. I'm speaking Spanish. Am, bueno, al venir de un contexto complejo, justamente en Colombia y más en una región de la Amazonía, creo que desde este otro lado es sumamente importante impulsar los liderazgos locales que puedan generar acciones a largo plazo y evitar la migración de las nuevas generaciones. Se requiere que vuelvan al territorio y uno de los grandes trabajos y preguntas que nace para las instituciones y gobiernos es cómo hacemos un retorno efectivo de todos los profesionales de juventudes para que vuelvan a construir ese tejido social, ¿no? Hay muchas barreras y más para Colombia especialmente, entendiendo un poco el contexto de la paz. La paz para algunos países puede ser una utopía y puede estar bien escrita dentro de los documentos, pero llevarla a los territorios se vuelve un desafío bastante. Entonces yo creo que uno de los trabajos es hacer ciencia desde lo local hacia lo internacional. El idioma es una barrera. The language is limiting the conversation specific in the space. For me, it's difficult expression the situation now, no? It's okay.
I wish I could have all understanding because it was very powerful. So she mentioned about, coming from Colombia and a very difficult landscape. Local leadership is very important that can generate long-term action and avoid the migration of generations. They need to come back to the territory. And one big question is how we make an effective return of all those youth so they can go back and construct that social side of the communities that we are missing, and understanding as well the concept of peace. That can be utopian for some countries, but bringing it to the local societies and the local people is a challenge. We need to bring science from the local to the international, and language is, as always, limiting the conversation between peers. Now I'm gonna give the floor to Daniela.
I had to pitch him here and say, I'm behind you, not going to see me. Yeah, so I wanted, because this panel is about navigating the climate crisis, so aligning goals, and I was just thinking a little bit coming back to the gentrification part and the part of social justice. I was wondering, and I would like to actually give this question to my Brazilian friend here. Could you tell us a little bit about intersectionality? Because, of course, we have women, but then we have women that are part of minority. Then we have women who are part of minority and have a health problem. Then we have women who are part of the minority, have a health problem, and are beaten by their husbands, or are in a social situation that is difficult. So maybe we can talk a little bit about this intersectionality here a bit more.
Sure. So it's interesting because I did an article that was published in a law book about environmental justice, and I wrote a bit about a thesis from a professor from California named David Nagui-Pello. And he speaks about something that's named scale. So when we talk about scale, we need to understand that there is the world, and then there are continents, then there are countries, regions, states, cities, communities. And when we talk about intersectionality, it's related to scale, because how climate change impacts people and communities is related to what kind of issues each person and each community is facing. And then we need to understand that the global north, as you must know, is the most responsible for the emissions, and the global south is the part of the world that's being more affected and has less resources to fight against climate change. And then when we go to the most community and individual issues, we get into intersectionality, because in Brazil, for example, we have São Paulo, which is our New York. It's a huge city that faces different issues and that has also favelas and those communities. But the challenges they face are different from, for example, a Black woman from a Quilombola community in a very far place where they don't have electricity or internet, and even to access education is very hard. And then when they face any kind of climate crisis, they are alone. There's no one there to help them. The governments don't care. They don't have any spotlight. So intersectionality is very important. People very differently. Yeah, I hope I gave some insights there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give the floor to Hon Yin now. I hope I pronounce okay. Ho Yin, yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to the esteemed speakers. I want to continue the theme on a just transition for climate, especially as Australia and the Pacific are looking to host the next COP for after Belém in Brazil. And while it's really important to spotlight the Pacific and build on nature positive biodiversity from the Amazon and do a spotlight on oceans as well, Australia wants to become a superpower for renewable energies, and we've talked about technologies and innovations. In January, I was advising and working with one of the mayors who will host the first renewable energy zone in Australia, with solar panels, wind farms in a rural and regional area of the countryside. And she's very concerned and alarmed for her communities, because these private companies, while the technology is fantastic, and in order to have this transition, we need to focus on renewables, it's not benefiting the community. There's no investments back into people in terms of infrastructure, in terms of affordable housing, in terms of how people are going to live, in terms of future generations that, again, will face losses and damages as a generation if they're not invested in. And I worry because I feel like we're leaving people behind again. We're not learning the mistakes of the past. In Australia, our richest people are mining billionaires, people who have exploited our environment. And while we will hopefully stop doing this, we will create future billionaires in our countries who will be the top 1% through renewable and new technologies, and where that common wealth, the public wealth, and the shared wealth isn't being distributed equally towards a just transition. How do we fight this?
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. And yeah, I mean, to deal with climate change, it's nothing less than the rebuilding of our entire global economic system and infrastructure. And that's, of course, not going to be easy. And, you know, I think for us working as, you know, climate activists or advocates, we don't have any problem with, you know, your average guy who's sort of working on an oil rig, because that's the best job he could find. The issue is with the governments who are making decisions to put in policies in place that allows all this rampant pollution, and the business leaders who are taking advantage of the situation and doing sort of terrible practices. And so, yes, I think it is going to require forward-thinking investment. I was talking in the break just now about adult education. I think we really need sort of adult education to be a concept that's normalized. And as sort of the global economic system changes, we need to be making sure that people aren't being left behind and that investment is there. I can't say that's happening right now, but I can at least say this is something that's that COP is thinking about. It is discussed in the COP, as well as the constituency I mentioned for youth NGOs. There's another constituency for trade unions and workers. There was actually a formal plan adopted on just transition at the most recent COP. There's, by the way, also constituencies for women and gender groups, indigenous groups, covering some of the other intersectionality. So yeah, I think there is luckily more awareness of this, but yeah, definitely it's something that needs to be fully embedded in any planning around it.
Now to, yes.
So thank you, and thank you very much for sharing your insights, and let me congratulate you on the amazing work you're all doing on climate action. And I would like to share a thought, and let me slightly disagree that the climate movement is actually in a deep crisis. And I'm saying this because when it comes to people, young people or women people, or indigenous groups, I think it's getting stronger and is growing from day to day because there is more public awareness, there is more scientific consensus that the climate action is human-driven, and I see that fields not typically involved or not traditionally involved into climate action, there is a growing interest in them to take action. But of course, there are major challenges, let me say external challenges that the climate movement is facing from governmental decisions and actions. So to connect my question with the topic of our symposium, let me ask you, and my question is open to all the panelists, how can we and how do you sustain hope for climate action? Thank you.
I'm already talking a lot. I talk a lot, but about hope. So I think if we don't have hope, we have nothing. We are young. We need to have hope. So if we don't believe what's going to be of our lives or of our families, or even if we want to build a family, we need to have a lot of hope. If you want to have children, we need to be hopeful, and we need to change the world, because if not, what are we going to leave for them? So yeah, being brief, that's it.
Well, I absolutely agree. I think hope is everything, but I think the reality is no generation thinks they're the best generation. Like, we all have our own problems. Our parents, our grandparents' generation. So I actually have a theory is for us, like no generation like us has this kind of access to information and then solution. So from this level, I'm really positive. If you just look at the level, like how, like for example, like how AI been shaping up, it's ridiculously crazy. Like every day, there are new things coming up. And then new solutions coming up in the past year, like more than a couple of decades, pretty much. And it's creating so much new economy and jobs, and then ways that you don't need a big name, a title to create a fortune. And then I think that for reality is the access for the youth specifically. And then all you need is internet and then electricity. And then the second example, I think is innovation is very expensive. Even like we look at the solar, it's so cheap today, but the pathway, like the the path, like how it's becoming today. Like someone sacrificed it. And then, yes, I guess like I'm positive, and I think that's the whole reason like we're here. And then you're gonna like your job. I think that's what keeps you moving on in the end.
We will take just one final question from Manav. Manav, the floor is all yours.
Hello. So it was a very interesting discussion regarding all the topics that we talk about: climate change, gender issues, intersectionality. And I just thought like one of the challenges that I faced as a young researcher, like based on working on different European Union projects, like working with African stakeholders, European stakeholders, like the tussle and hustle that we have defining the definition. For example, I mean, like we talked about just transition, like there is so much confusion around just transition. Africa has a different definition and has a different priorities for just transition. European Union has a different, and then there is a issue with, okay, we don't want to agree with the Chinese definition. So how can we, let's say, have possible pathways in future if we just fighting for, having the clear definition is really one of the things that I really find most struggle during my PhD too. Like, for example, my PhD topic was on circular economy, and there are almost 114 definitions of circular economy. I mean, I am at the Vatican City, I am attending a summit at Vatican City. What difference does it make? At the end of the day, I am at the Vatican City, So I think it's a question it's an open-ended, I think it's an intergeneration dialogue that we are having, and it's an open-ended question to everybody. How can we find solution where there is so much fight about just setting up the definition? So that was my question, yeah. Thank you.
Well, I want to jump in because I really like your question here. Well, you might not like this, but I think what's happening is people don't want one standardized definition. And I don't have a PhD degree finished, but I think research is to create knowledge, and then builder like myself is to utilize knowledge to build stuff. In order to create the new knowledge, you're exploring something you probably cannot directly learn from, or you're the expert what you're working on. Back to definition, the question itself might be a good question, like why there's no standardized definition, the motivation behind, and then that goes to, I think, some solution to a question you might want to find out. And then I mean, like I always have this feeling like in climate, like people are creating so many unnecessary complex terminologies to make these things even more difficult, and then not giving solutions. And that's in a way like why I want to do this. Like if you go to ChatGPT today, ask how can I create a green mark certificate for my building, it will not tell you because the training data doesn't conclude that information. So this is one thing as little as possible. Like we wanted to hear to like internalize to. Get the experts' experience and then use what we have to provide a solution for. And I'm sure like the journey figuring out your question is what research meaning for. So.
Yeah, no, in COP, it's, you know this well. Sadly, it's not just transition. There's a lot of other terms that they'll, sorry?
Gender.
Yeah, yes.
There is no consensus in
gender. I mean, they'll argue for a year about, one full stop, let alone even a word. In my experience, usually when this happens is honestly, it's a negotiation tactic from certain countries. Like usually off the record, they might tell you, well, to be honest, I've been told to go into this negotiation and prevent an outcome at any cost, and so I'm just going to argue for a year about the definition of this term, which is very unfortunate. I guess what I'll say is, it gives me more hope, though, is that young people have no time for this. absolutely no time for it. And I mentioned earlier, you know, the number of young people participating in COP is hugely growing, both from civil society and as part of actual government delegations. Yeah, and I guess coming back to your question about hope, yeah, I think young people is what gives me hope. Honestly, like this event is the embodiment of hope, like hearing the solutions just of the young people in this room, you know, and that's just a drop in the ocean of what the youth movement is doing. So I do think we have a huge amount to be hopeful for. And yeah, another shout out to Kayla, Raquel, and Gabriela for bringing us all together. Yeah, it's really amazing to feel the hope from events like this. But yeah, thank you.
As we wrap up, I would like to hear from each of our panelists in one sentence. I know it's very challenging, one sentence only. What is one action that every person, regardless of their background, can take today to be part of the solution navigating the climate crisis? Karen, you want to start?
I only have one word, I think is learn, like learning.
Olivia?
I was going to say capacity building. But then I think collaboration. We need to collaborate. It doesn't matter our age, our gender, our country. We need to collaborate.
I think my microphone is on. One sentence. 3 C's. Begin with charity. Move to communication. Move to collaboration.
Thank you. Support the work on the land defenders. We cannot move forward without recognize their knowledge system as solution to climate change.
I'll say advocacy. However you can, whatever governance system you live in, whatever field you're in, business, law, academia, you can advocate on these issues and it will make a difference.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. Today's conversation has reinforced a powerful truth. Navigating the climate crisis is not solely about policies, finance, or technology. It's about courage. The courage to trust in science and indigenous knowledge, to challenge systems that have long hindered progress, and to take bold, decisive action, even when the obstacles ahead seem overwhelming. But more importantly, it's about collective courage, the courage of youth, of communities, of women, of young leaders who are uniting to reshape our future. Each of us, whether we are scientists, activists, policymakers, or entrepreneurs, holds a piece of the solution. The climate crisis is not a challenge we can afford to ignore, but it is also not a challenge we face alone. But solutions are meaningless if they remain confined to the walls of this room. They must be taken back to our communities, to our institutions, and into our decision-making spaces. Because the future of our planet is not just written in agreements, it's written in the actions we choose to take when we live here today. So I leave you all with this challenge. What is the one action you will take after all the amazing sessions we have today to drive real change? Will you advocate for stronger policies? Will you advocate for more inclusion of youth in education, for better support and more support of member states in human rights? Will you support the frontline communities fighting for survival? And most importantly, what will you do to empower youth? To empower the next generation that one day will be seated in that seat you are taking right now. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
That was really great. All of our sessions today were really wonderful. We're kind of leaving the last half an hour as to open it up for reflections, Raquel has some reflections she wants to share. And I have a question that's open, honestly, to anybody in this room. Zan knows about it the most when he referenced the youth climate champion role of the presidency, which is institutionalizing the youth climate champion under the UNFCCC, which is a major win for young people in the space. However, I'm not going to direct it at you, Zan, but what I want to know is, do you view that as a small drop in the ocean, or do you view this as a win? And I actually would love to hear from people who work in the UN space. Paul, Monica, Philip, Betsy, do you view that as a big win, or is it kind of just a small step? So whoever would like to answer that. Oops, sorry.
I think it's a first step in a line of many steps that we need to take. It is a win. Is it a huge win? No, but at least it creates the seat at the table for someone who has a big community behind them. SG Ban created the Youth Envoy at the UN, and the Youth Envoy has become an amazing role that really co-shapes the agenda. We had the wonderful Ahmed and Jayatma, and now the new UN Youth Envoy. And was it a win from the get-go? No, not necessarily, but they made it a win. So I have every trust that youth will use that wisely and will make their voices heard. And we as Ban Ki-moon Center try to do our share, bringing smallholder farmers, particularly young smallholder farmers, to actually make their claim, because they're hit hardest by the climate crisis. And we try to bring them to the COPs and have the negotiation with their ministers and make their policy advancements. And so if each and every one of us does their little share of getting the voices into the room and at the table, then we are better off. So it's a small step, but it's an important one.
Yes, I wanted to agree with what Monica said. Tomorrow I'll speak more about institutionalized youth engagement, but I just wanted to say that any seat that is created at the table for youth is a great win. It's not the only win. There are more methods of youth activism and youth engagement in decision-making and policy drafting, but this is definitely a very major win to consider.
I just want to add to that, as part of the Pacts for the Future that was adopted and agreed on during the UN General Assembly last year, is also the formation of a new special envoy for future generations. And I want to point this out, which would be announced this year by the UN Secretary General. I think this position, which is distinct to a youth envoy or the current Undersecretary General for Youth, which is also a recent addition to the UN bilateral system, but recognizing similarly in terms of the intergenerational allyship and the action of learning from elders. And in fact, having somebody who is an elder, who is going to bridge that divide and the generational gaps is critical, because for far too long, as we know, young people have been talking amongst young people. And while we are now at that point where we're having seats at the table, being able to have champions and mentors and people who similarly at our age were having these discussions in these rooms and in these fora become equally important, because we cannot do it alone, and we need the elder generation to be there backing us and supporting us all the way.
I think you said my name, did you? When you okay. So the thing about the, hopefully I'm answering your question, is that I think it is excellent in any of these UN meetings, the presidency or the host country, if you have access like that, you know, to the different chairs and meetings, I think it is quite powerful. It does bring up an issue, though, about coordination from you delegates that come from the member states or within the UN itself, and then with the presidency, how coordinate. And I think that's an issue that has been solved. But the big thing for me is how you bring the global agreement down to the national level and bring it through the legislation, because even though you could see, for example, Irish delegates doing extremely well in the COPs, The issue then is, are they allowed into the bureaucratic side of government in the planning? Are they allowed into the parliament? Are they allowed kind of be part of the follow-up and review at the nation state? So it's this type of interoperability about youth empowerment at global level, which I think is getting much better, but it has to happen at the national level. You've got to bring it back into implementation at the national level. So in Ireland, I'm questioning, and I've written papers about it, you know, you've got to create these entry points for youth. If you're doing it in the global negotiations, you've got to do it at the national level to make this really hit home.
Thank you so much. And I think I just want to make one reflection from the conversations that we've had today. My name is Resuna Maluleke. I'm the CEO of the Young African Entrepreneurs Institute from South Africa. I think one key thing that I want to reflect on is particularly on defining or having a common definition of terms, right? For example, I think what was raised was more around the just energy transition. What makes it difficult for us to have that common understanding, I think for me, it's more about wanting to have a common definition or well understood in that common way when there's no equitable participation or representation in terms of actually establishing some of those terms, right? And I think such platforms are very important that we need to have proper representation from the different parts of the world in order for everyone then to be able to say, if just energy transition is understood, well, perhaps in the US, it should take the same understanding, at least in Africa or in South Africa, you know, where I come from, because of that representation that we're talking about. So what is more important and what young people should be doing is to say, how do we have an equal representation in forums and platforms that seek to actually establish and define the world that we want to live in? So for me, that's basically, and most importantly, what we need to take as a direction. We need equitable representation in order for us to have well understood definition of terms that guide the sustainability of the world that we are living in. Thank you.
Yeah, just coming back at Paul a bit. Paul, you were talking about bringing it to the national level. You can imagine what I'm going to say. Bring it to the local level as well. Yeah.
I just want to share my experience related to your question to the Youth Climate Champion team. So in the COP28, me and Livia were selected one of the 100 youth delegates as part of the Youth Climate Champion. And most of the delegates that were selected were from small islands, conflict area, and it involved capacity building, learning about the COP processes, which is really useful. But then in the next year, we saw many of the delegates are actually involved with their national delegation because before they didn't have the capacity building. And for me personally, for example, I was displaced from my home country and I couldn't participate from my home country or the hosting country. So spaces like that and program like the Youth Climate Champion were the only opportunity where I actually can participate. So these spaces are really important to involve youth that are stuck in the gaps or do not fit anywhere. Thank you.
Just to complement what has been said, I think it's very important to have a place. And once there's a place, a question should come of what does meaningful engagement means at that point? And finally, what are the mechanisms that are in place at all levels to ensure youth understand what their role is and also help them to navigate in that process? Especially, coming from the UNCCC, the spaces at the UN are very complex with their own terminology, their own process to follow. And usually, if you don't have a mentor, someone, it's very difficult. So how do we ensure also the mechanisms are, youth-friendly so we can also engage them properly? Thank you.
Thank you so much all to sharing. And I just want to compliment what Antonio just said, because we need to have a manual or something that explains how all these processes work. And I'm very interested, tomorrow we're gonna have a session that talks about the war in the post-2030. And actually, Samer is going to talk. He leads the Mayo Group for Children and Youth, which I'm sure many of you are very, very familiar because they provide many opportunities for young people from everywhere to engage in UN processes. For example, the ECOSOC Youth Forum, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks, the UN General Assembly as well. And I also want to relate this to what Alejandra mentioned of like how the language, it's very, very challenging. And at SESN, we lately more because of the situation, but we've been very committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that is actually one of the things that we had in mind when we were putting the symposium together and having this diversity. But one of the discussions I was having with my colleagues that also work with other youth initiatives, it was actually the language. Of course, English seems to be the global language, but English is not accessible for everybody. So how do we overcome these barriers, not only of language, also of disabilities? And I must say that, yes, this conference, it's very diverse in terms of country representation, but if you notice, this venue, it is not friendly for disabled people, unfortunately. So we are winning on one side, but we're also losing on one side. So I think it's very, very difficult to have something that is perfect, but I think, as Monica said, like every little progress counts. And we have come very, very far. And I'm sure that we're gonna continue to come very far, but it's just something that we all need to reflect that I think we're all doing our best, at least the people in this room, and that is incredible to see. And I can leave you with that. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to comment. I know it's been a very, very long day. I know we're all tired, but I think it has been a very insightful day one, very, very interesting panels. I'm not sure if you feel like me that you want to continue to talk to these persons and you want to ask them as many questions as possible. So I will actually love to invite the people maybe who haven't spoken, haven't asked a question, because we also want to hear the voices. And I will leave you with this prompt. Does anybody, preferably of the people who haven't spoken yet, that want to share something that stood up with them from this day? And I will leave the floor open for anybody.
Don't be shy.
We can call people. Yeah, maybe, let me see. I think Camila. Can we put you on the spot? And can you tell us, like, is there something that stood up with you today that you want to share?
Well, I think everything. It's been such an interesting conversation, and I'm so thankful to be here. Something that has stood up for me personally, I don't mean to be negative or sound negative at all, but it's just I struggle sometimes, for example, with making an impact. Just as a little bit of background, I'm from Ecuador, South America, and I work in technology. And I deeply care about the environment, and I wish I could make a difference. And I believe I'm doing so by volunteering at SDSN Youth. And something, we have talked a lot about AI and how it has helped people, how technology can help people in so many ways. But I'm also left with the doubt or with this internal conflict that I'm like, well, I work in tech, so I work with AI, but also I know the impact it has on the environment. So for me, that's just like a personal or like an internal discussion I have. And yeah, I was thinking, Karen, yeah, I was meaning to ask you this in the session, but we ran out of time. and just how do you handle it? Because I know the platform does so much, and it's great, but how do you handle like the impact it has? And I mean, I open this question for everyone, like, you know, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but yeah, so I would love to know your thoughts on this.
Honest, the answer is when you're so focused on building something, you don't think about other problems. And then for us, as a problem is very clear. I think it's also a way how I persuade myself to solve problems piece by piece. I know there's so many, like even things you haven't mentioned, like the negative impact of AI, the consumption of the energy, and then there's so many like jobs being taken away, and then even not to mention the education. We have so many holes to fix. I think that's why like you need. I mean, I think it's a good thing. I tend to look at things very positively, and there's so many problems means like there's so many jobs need to be filled. So we shouldn't be worried about like jobs being taken. There's so many new being created.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
We're gonna wrap up, but anybody else wants to say something before we do? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I haven't spoken yet. I'm Gaia Guadagnini. We'll be speaking tomorrow for the Young Ambassadors Society. I think rather than maybe repeating some of the common themes that have come up throughout the day, one that I haven't heard yet is how do we youth feel the gap and the distance and the differences without fueling confront with the older generations. So not only we speak up, not only we give opportunities to youth to do so, but how do we learn to do and foster that communication so that we bring together the older generations that have experience, that have been in the field for a while, and might be also scared from this confrontation. So how do we foster collaboration with them as well, rather than diminishing it? So I hope we'll talk about that with the World Beyond 2030 tomorrow as well. Thank you everyone for the talks.
Camila wants to talk more.
One more thing. I love the dialogue, and I think it's great. I think it's great to have people from every sector. But I just want to encourage, because I've been thinking about this myself, on taking action. So I think the dialogue is great, but I think that after tomorrow, we should think about like action, individual actions, collective actions, and how each of us like can make a difference in our spaces.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually that is the perfect point to wrap up day one. But I mean, having this symposium is not just to have these conversations, because those conversations can happen anywhere, but it's also, you know, we're gathering such an exceptional group of youth advocates and change makers. So making a call to action is something that we really want to do, and is something that we definitely will be touching tomorrow. But if you have any ideas, please start spreading them among them, and then maybe you can put them in a document and send it to us, and like that can be something that we can talk about tomorrow. But I think this is the perfect day to the perfect time to finish day one. And as I said, I know maybe I speak for myself, but I am tired, not because it was too much, but it's just that it's been a long day. It's been a long couple of months, yeah. But really, we are very thankful for all of you to be here, and we'll continue tomorrow. The day is not finished. The symposium is not finished. Of course, we will have dinner right now, but tomorrow we also have the Generali workshop, and we do have 2 more sessions, and then the closing, the call to action. So I really want to see and continue these conversations tomorrow. But I will leave it here. I don't want to extend it more, but thank you so much to everybody.